again, Chris, for keeping the community alive. I love all these indie stuff, and so I've been really happy to be a part of all of that. Yeah, to folks, especially in the region, it's been very cool to have virtual and physical meetups where people are just able to talk to each other about something that comes up during a talk. That's to make it more like a discussion. So if anything comes to mind, hopefully not too much trolling, we can feel free to just raise your hand or however you like. There's enough content to go for a bit, like I would say, depending on my rambling, something in the 40-ish minutes range, and we'll have time. So if you find a topic that you want to double click on or whatever, just let me know. I know there were some concerns about screen. So can folks see the entirety of my screen at the moment? Like the moving from the whole text. Okay, I see some thumbs up. So that's cool. So let's get on to it. So basically a bunch of random words here, which hopefully will come together. Let me just get started. So yeah, I'm working at Tetrate, which is a like traditionally a service managed gateway company, and I've been working on Gen AI stuff. And some of you in the region will have noticed I've talked a bit about Goose, which is a AI agent that was started over in Sydney. And I've been working with those folks for a while. Not so much as much in like the last month or so because I was busy on other things, but usually I'm putting in code fairly frequently. Before that, I did a lot of work in distributed tracing and cloud portability and things. So I'm been mostly on the open source side of things and mostly in the sort of dev to prod, not so much often in the SRE space. That's my context. And of course, that's my LinkedIn. So to do the quick recap, because I know a lot of folks have probably seen these before, but at the end of the day, LLMs were the way that we can autocomplete text and images in the past, and agentic is trying to autocomplete actions, and they do that with tools, which could be something like a web search or some Asana scheduler or whatever your particular workflow requires. The most common interface for tools that you can complete actions with would be Model Context Protocol, called MCP, which may be the worst possible name for tool protocol. But it actually does more than tools now. It's pretty interesting spec area. It's very big. So you could talk for hours on just this thing. But most people think of it just like, okay, how do I do like an AI analog to a REST API call? And that's the connected glue there. And what people say when they say agent loop is basically that you're chatting along and you enter in that your prompt, and it's thinking, it's figuring out whether or not it should use a tool or not, and then generating a result through some sequence of calling those, and then you're back to your prompt again, and you can continue. So that loop is what it's meant. So because humans are often the primary interface target for Gen AI applications, we talk about these loops often with things like permissions dialogues and everything that you may have seen. But there are different ways to work with Gen AI. Nowadays, there's not just the traditional LangChain frameworks, but there's also some pretty interesting things in Java space called like Mbabble and some other ways to try to kind of put some predictability around the unpredictability. This talk is not going to deep dive into like all the ways that you can make agents, but suffice to say that they all have this kind of loop concept, and that's helpful when you contextualize the infrastructure around them. MCP, that's the Model Context Protocol, the tool serving thing, is, I guess, old in AI days, but not very old, because we're less than 2 years old on that. Um, the most interesting thing for folks who haven't been keeping track lately is that in a month, basically, unless something strange happens, the protocol will make kind of like an about face on how it works to be much more like traditional web services than like your like the bidirectional JSON RPC way that it works now. Particularly, this helps with load balancing and fitting into existing infrastructures, such as like Google and other cloud services, where when you have a stateless API that doesn't have a session attached to it, you have a lot more flexibility in how you weave your infrastructure together. So if you think of it this way, if MCP is just like proxying something like your Swagger defined API somewhere, there's no reason for stateless, I mean, for a stateful session anyway. And so there are a lot of APIs and use cases like that where it just doesn't benefit. So this is not like a deep dive in MCP, but I did want to mention that because it's coming up pretty soon. Like I don't know if it will be 100% in the next spec, but it should be like, yeah, imminent. And it's already in the draft form now. So Goose is yeah, it's like a traditional AI chat GPT type of interface where you can choose like your previous chats to resume or whatever you want. This experience is pretty much unsurprising. Um, it's um, it's an open source fully, so like all of the code, including the UI and also a terminal UI if people like that. There's no closed source part of Goose anywhere. I don't quote me on this one. Well, it's going to be quoted anyway. But I believe that Red Hat are doing distributions of Goose, so it's not just community at this point. Although Red Hat are a community. Um, it started as a MCP centric solution, and they're now working towards a new protocol called ACP with the Goose version 2. And there's some blogs around that. I'm not going to deep dive on that particular topic, but there's basically some new aspects of portability that are going to be core. And most notably, it was one of the founding projects of the new Agentic AI Foundation. That's a new Linux foundation that's similar to CNCF, which is what Kubernetes and everything is thrown into for the cloud native. You can think of it as the AI native foundation, for lack of better terms. And so that is accumulating projects and proposals to be projects. It started off with the MCP Summit itself. So like the conference was a donated project, which is kind of an interesting thing I've never seen before. I'm sure it's happened, but like donating a conference is actually more important than some code projects, in my opinion. And then like the agent.md, which is like a format for trying to give a common instruction to agents, regardless of what type of project or what type of agent you're using. That's the goal anyway. And then Goose, I believe, were the first three projects in the this Linux Foundation. Forgive me, I haven't been tracking if there's been any notable new ones, but that's where it started. Obviously, MCP is in there. That was the biggest one. So basically, they're close friends in this foundation, which will be growing, as you can imagine. Like for example, CNCF started with just a few projects, and then it quickly exploded into 1 million of them. So I would follow this space if you're interested. One of the features that's not new in any way, it's been here in Goose for at least a year, is a concept of a recipe where you basically package up a prompt and a template format for what kind of parameters that it needs and anything that it needs. Like Goose extensions are basically usually for tools, but it's not limited to tools. There are extensions for like managing your tools as code, and there's also extensions for certain ways to influence how thinking works. So it's not limited to tools. there are extensions that actually significantly change the behavior of Goose itself. But most people will just be using these to add tools to their stuff, whether that's like Tessel or something like that, which is like a way to add skill docs into your agentic workflow or whatever it happens to be that's in your workflow. So you could kind of package in the dependencies in a way in this manifest format, and then do some parameterized things so that when you run the CLI or the UI, it will have forms that you can fill out. So it's kind of neat. It's just one feature that Goose has. There's like, I would say somewhere in the scale of 2 to 3 dozen significant agent projects similar to Goose at this point. Significant enough that are worth looking at. And there are more famous projects than Goose. Like Pi is one of them because that was made super famous with OpenClaw. But I'm most familiar with Goose, and there's similarities between this and any other technology you might be using. Envoy AI Gateway is like on the other side of the network. So if your agent is on your desktop, mostly because remote agents are not super common, they are becoming more common, but most of the time the AI agent is actually running on your desktop or your like a pod or something like that. AI Gateway is basically a way to give the dependent resources that these need, typically remote resources. So the most common one is LLM itself. Like, how do you get access to OpenAI compatible or Anthropic compatible or Amazon Bedrock or what have you? And then there's other things like MCP or any of the other features that you need in a normal API gateway. I'll get into more of the details in subsequent slides. But the main thing here is that this is a project that's also getting some years on it as far as AI time. It was originally coming out of Bloomberg as a way to kind of like wrangle the chaos of just like at the time late LLM was not as grown up as it is now, and there was a lot of sprawl of like every group like spinning up their own unmanaged services, which could be problematic. And so they were using a Kubernetes gateway approach. So basically, Envoy AI Gateway is a Kubernetes compatible gateway. So effectively, you can have a cluster, and this is going to accept all of the AI-shaped traffic in there. TARS, which the T there is Tetrate, my company. We were the first to try it out on a public SaaS, and it's in the list of recommended Goose providers. But AI Gateway itself is a CNCF project, so it's inside of the Envoy umbrella, which I'll talk about, and it's been a pretty stable community. This slide is showing like kind of the relationship. Why would you have Envoy as a part of your gateway solution? And basically, the agent needs to talk to multiple things. And Envoy AI Gateway is riding on top of the Envoy Gateway infrastructure, which is like how you do any API gateway, and it raises the abstraction from there to like token orientation and stuff like that. But like how it technically works is that Envoy has a lot of extensibility built into it. So you can use filters that are built in for just about anything. They even have MCP native filters now that you can use to basically connect to your web services directly from the proxy. They have Lua scripts, so you can like tweak something, like add or remove a header, or do any other weird thing you might need to do in the infrastructure. External process, which is a very, like I would say, code lenient way to integrate. What happens is that it allows you to run like a sidecar to your sidecar, which is speaking over gRPC protocol. And so you can choose your favorite programming language to add your own filters or interception points. And the overhead may be perfectly fine for some, especially like heavy things that are already heavy. especially because the overhead isn't so bad when you're using Unix domain socket, which is effectively a local host technology for that communication. But Envoy is also a pretty good pick for any type of mesh or gateway in general because it's extremely dynamic. What that means is like they have their own protocol called XDS, which is a set of dynamic configuration. Um, so you can do things like reconfigure your proxies, reconfigure your log levels. There's a lot of you can even the Envoy has some hot deploy features of its own. It's a really evolved proxy. So when you're thinking about something like AI, where there's like a lot of things that have to move pretty quickly, like you might need to swap out a part because like some API is suddenly deprecated or something weird like that, it does kind of make sense in that type of infrastructure. And it makes more sense because it's already like a well-trodden path. It's the chosen proxy for SDO and things like that. It's not like an Envoy pitch. I'm just saying like it does kind of meet the ground in a fairly natural way, and there's some good parts there that make this all work pretty well. So if you like go back to like a less weedy slide and think of it as like one box, then the single origin here would basically mean that when you're if your agent has to like connect to different things, it probably has to connect to certain things that are local for whatever reason. Like so if I'm using Claude Code or something like that, and or Goose or whatever my favorite agent is, when it's editing files on disk, of course, I don't want to necessarily have to deal with a remote file system and like ship of things just to have a gateway involved. So I might like not try to interfere with how it works with local files. So that would be like a local server. So MCP supports remote protocols and local protocols. And a lot of times people had been working with local servers for longer because there weren't any remote servers. And so to get to a remote capable system, you'd have to go through like a little proxy on your host system. But now we're getting a lot more remote services, and there's like a 1,000 scale catalog of services now, and like OAuth integrations and things. So there's now like more choice than a constraint on using local versus remote. But I would say like a lot of times when you're talking about like a coding agent or just a normal agent, it's typically going to be like more local centric. But if you're doing some product like say research agent or something like a Perplexity type of thing, most of those things don't require permanent access to any local scratch. So they could just like do little Python stuff in a sandbox and that's it. So it's kind of a long-winded way of saying that the gateway is your way out of your network. And so there will still be things in your agent that don't need to leave the network. And that was the point there. When you're on your way out, there are some pretty important parts about why you would want to have a gateway. One thing is that you can't fully trust your agent. If you think about like agents not really being compliant, it's not like they're being like they're not like spies or anything, but they can accidentally embarrass people or extort information or whatever. So a lot of times you need extensibility in an enterprise gateway because you might need to have some certain things that are scrubbing or being careful about like redaction policies and things. The other thing is you don't want to hand an agent a real token that is on any backend provider because once it figures that out, that it has access to that, like say it finds it on disk somewhere, it will start working around your gateway and it'll just like make its own HTTP calls or write Python instead. And because they can't really be controlled that well, um, you want to keep like a boundary where like your agent has a different credential than the backend. So even if you think that it's like um, okay, it's not so much value, but if you think of it in perspective of like this potentially harmful beast that's working mostly autonomously and doesn't always tell you the truth about what it's doing, then proxying at least your credentials is a fairly wise decision. And like also just normal API stuff, if you have one gateway and you're using it for tools and the LLM traffic that the agent does, the other cool thing is you get your normal stuff like rate limiting and any kind of bucketing type of stuff that you could do with any API would be available there, and you get the same log files and stuff. So that's helpful. Authorization is tricky, and it's ever so tricky more. I did touch on some of these things. So the canonical way that a lot of apps have connected to things like OpenAI or Mistral or whatever it is API key. And so those were like, the static keys that you can get with particular scopes or whatever. But obviously in enterprise, we've been working on OAuth, and some people have their own JSON web tokens and other types of mechanisms that they use. And some of them have the ability to do authorization policies that would be a better fit for potentially wild agents. And because of this like injection on a per backend basis, you do have the advantage of no agent side credential management, which is that leaky part. But also this is an extremely evolving space with a lot of experts. And because MCP as a community group is a pretty robust group, there's like 100 special interest groups, and so there's enough specialty areas and specialists inside those areas that pretty much you'd be sure that you can drill down into something like the auth and auth-C and find tons of patterns and many of them open source. So the authorization is the tricky part, but choosing this ecosystem has an advantage that you're not there on your own. If you use any open source AI gateway, they're going to have like some paved paths for you. And also the community is constantly looking at these tricky issues. So you don't have to necessarily be like your own like AI agent expert about all the weird things they do, because other people are doing that and they're doing that in open source. So that's pretty cool. So if I try to like recap together, like what does the gateway, in this case, these are features of Envoy AI Gateway, and like summarize the sort of things that you get with that. Talked about auth a million times. Token rate limiting. So why token? Because when we talk about normal web services, we are worried about like latency and drop-offs from users about things like that, and error rates in a very different way than agent stuff. The cost for a simple web request would more likely not be so much versus the cost of an LLM as far as infrastructure is concerned. Like it might have a very high business impact for a particular single web request, but like the cost to serve a request is quite different. That's because these LLMs are very expensive machines, and when they make mistakes, you typically have to redo the whole request again. So there's different impacts there. The bill metric is typically in terms of tokens instead of like bytes or requests. So there would be like a cost for like million tokens or whatever. And let's say I had a really like, for example, I have griped quite a bit with the rest of the community about like Opus 4.7 being like a step backwards as far as performance. And so I've pinned all of my stuff to 4.6. When 4.7 came out, I would end up having a lot more of my quota usage done on task where they were just failing again and again. And that's spending money each time that there's a failure. And so it's not so much about it is about the end user's experience, because the more failures, the slower it is. But but each of those failures could cost you quite a lot of money depending on how many like things fanned out into it. Like for example, I tried one of the non-all-you-can-eat subscriptions and tried to do some work on it, which was really cool and it was really excellent performance. But I used my entire month's budget up in 3 days, and most of that was because of something failing. And that's just a person, like that's just me. So a company could have like some significant concerns about like token consumption based on like cost. So typically in an AI gateway, you get the aggregate of tokens because that's where the cost is coming from. That's where you can know if something looks like it's running away or not. There's a lot of things you can derive from that. So, and it's one of the few things that are in common between LLMs, and so that's pretty handy. The token to bill ratio is somewhat fluid, like any bill would be. Like sometimes they change their prices, sometimes they're on a 5 hour all you can eat or close to like the actual billing policies of these AI providers can be quite complex. Um, but like a complex gateway has the ability to inject code and anything custom to deal with those things if they impact you. Observability is a pretty normal thing, but there is a twist for Gen AI, which is a quality concept. So like I said, if something's not performing well, like you have a AI task and it just keeps failing on the same thing because it's like monkeying the wrong parameters. There are many ways to solve those problems. And the most fundamental is an old ML trick called evaluation, where you pair a request and response, and then you have a judge that would be able um, to give a score. And in fact, you'd usually have multiple score, like an aggregate score. And you could even combine that with human feedback. Like, for example, did they click thumbs up or thumbs down or whatever on that particular chat conversation? Did they type a message in when they said down? We see these in our normal consumer apps that we use for chat. And they use like eval processes or they have ways of supporting that. And what eval means is basically the proxy would have to collect the entire request response and allow some async processing if it's chosen to be like evaluated. And you would hand that off to a system. There's a data format called Open Inference, which is out of the box with Envoy AI Gateway, and that supports the Arise platform. They have an open source eval called Phoenix, and they also have commercial products. But basically, you can do the handoff there to sort of the more human QA side, as opposed to like just the system side. And so that's one of the things that's pretty AI specific in that category of observability. Everything else should feel pretty comfortable and convenient. Um, Sessions are important, even though I talked about sessions and MCP. The sessions in MCP are fairly valueless, and that's why they could do sessionless without too much complaints. But agents themselves, session is a very top level thing. Like if I were to use like Perplexity and I couldn't go back to a previous conversation that I had to continue it later, that would be a pretty bad UX fail. In any of the chat type of experiences, I would want to be able to stop or go back to a conversation. And usually those conversations, they have different names to them. It could be called session, they could be called thread, they could be called topic or whatever, but they're sessions. And so having that correlation is extremely important because that's something that connects all sorts of things together in a value space. Um, and then there's finally the stuff around MCP. So MCP is like, um, on a server side, you may want to change things based on what the backend says. Like maybe you want to reduce the amount of tools that are exposed. Maybe you want to change the way things are authorized, or use a JSON Web Token for scoping things more granular than the backend will allow. You may need a cell as a common expression language. That's a very common expression syntax that's in the cloud native ecosystem where you can say like if this and this and this do this, like for like filter policies. And so those type of things would be in the box. Um, And when it works in progress, like what happens is basically a gateway, just like any other intermediary, is plopped in the middle, and it just kind of proxies along. Now, it can do like translations, say like, for example, the agent thinks it's talking to OpenAI, but it's actually talking to Bedrock because that's what your enterprise uses, or your own um, uh, VLLM or LMD backend that you're doing your own model serving if you're an enterprise big enough to do that, or for whatever reason you do that. So it just kind of like normalizes the traffic and also collects those things and allows you to have those policies attached. But if you were to take the gateway out, it would look exactly the same from the agent perspective. So that's one of the nice things, that the experience shouldn't be too disruptive. In fact, it should help. And like not just protecting you from your agent knowing your credentials, but all these other things can help with the observability and such. And a concrete example of session correlation is like in access log format. So Envoy has its own access logger and it's plumbed through OpenTelemetry, so you can like ship it out to Elasticsearch or whatever. But whatever in this case Goose, if it's my front end, it will have some sort of a session ID, and you could collect all and do rollups and breakdowns based on what it's doing at the time. And you could just through logs alone, not even tracing, you could see things like how many tokens were related to how much latency. So of course, in real life, an agent does like a million things, so it's not like you're going to be able to just scan through it, but at least the data is in a format that's easy to parse and understand. And like all things enterprise, like all of these things are you can change them. Like you can change the name from latency to something else, or you can like put in more metadata or less metadata. That's one of the things that you get with an enterprise type of thing. And so I'm going to do a demo. And this is basically just using one of those recipes to do a flight search. And I'm going to just plumb together like a bunch of things that might be similar to something people would use. So I'll use a AI Gateway. It has a standalone mode, meaning that you can just run it like a normal Go process, a normal single process. It doesn't have to run inside of Kubernetes for this mode. So it's pretty simple and easy to do. And then I'll use Kiwi for flight search because they have foolishly not required authentication, and you can get actual data out of it. And then I'm going to use Ollama, which is a way to do local LLMs. So I'm going to here go to, well, first I'll show you what it looks like. So these are literally commands. So first off, if you've never used Ollama, you could use your favorite package manager to get it. And then Ollama suggests a bunch of settings, which I think should just be the default. But at any rate, you eventually serve it, and it has a Docker-like experience. You could do Ollama pool for a specific LLM, like a model that would be whatever your concerns are. Like if you want a DeepSeek or something like that, you could pull that down to your laptop and go. OTel TUI, I like terminal interfaces, and so I'm using that as an OpenTelemetry provider. I'm just using Go to run it because I prefer Go. I'm also just going to go ahead and run AI Gateway in its standalone mode, which is also a Go program, and point it at the local OpenTelemetry server, which is this OTel TUI. And then I'm going to point it at Ollama's. I'm going to have it pretend that Ollama is OpenAI because Ollama has a portable interface, so you can use it as a drop-in replacement for OpenAI platform. And I'm going to tell AI Gateway to run one MCP server, and this is a standard format. This MCP servers thing, you can plop it into anything, Claude or whatever, and use the Kiwi MCP server, which, like I said, I use that because it's great for demos because it doesn't require authentication and has very few characters. Then AI Gateway actually has its own test for Goose because we want to make sure that it works well. And so I'm just pulling down the recipe raw text from the source repo. And I'm pointing Goose at the gateway. So this is port 1975. So not OLAMAs, which is port 11434. And then I'm telling Goose to run this recipe. And so when it finishes, like everything will be going through there, and then you'll just get free OpenTelemetry, because I'm not actually showing anything here about OpenTelemetry or any other tracing or logging stuff through Goose. So I'm just going to do that now. So I already have Olama running, and I can just stop it again. So like in this case, it's just booting up a way to start and serve LLMs. And I have a fairly beefy laptop. I could use a big model, but I'm choosing for a demo to use something everybody can use. So I'm using a small one in the demo. Oops, that's not it. This is Hotel TUI, which is the text-based terminal, like OpenTelemetry thing that I like. And it doesn't have much data in here. There's just some old metrics that I'll clear out. And then see 3, 4. Sorry, the actual thing is going over my screen. Okay, here it is. And then I have AI Gateway here. I think that's right.
Sorry, Adrian. We don't see your terminal, so we still see your slide. Is that okay?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Let me try again. If I scroll here. Oh, I see. Sorry about that. Let me fix that. Thank you for telling me. Why is it not? I'm gonna unshare and then share again. Sorry about that. I meant to share the entire screen. Do you see it now?
Yeah, now we see the terminal. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. So, yeah. So anyway, Olama is just kind of like boring. You start up a server and then prints a bunch of cryptic text for you. This is not the screen I wanted. But, then I have Hotel TUI, which again I could just run. Hotel TUI, which is just a nice terminal emulator for OpenTelemetry data. And then I have AI Gateway. I'll go ahead and start that now with the same parameters. And then let me just I'll just go ahead and get this again. I'll get the text here for AI Gateway and the recipe. Okay, so that's running. That's great. Yeah, I've got the Kiwi recipe. Here's what it looks like. So in this case, I'm saying, flight search assistant, what's a description? And this is just used for UIs. And then the prompt gives like a shape, a JSON shape that I want the response to come out in. And I'm saying like, go from New York to Los Angeles, any flight's fine. And I wanted to use the gateway, which is port 1975 for the MCP, so it doesn't know that it's actually using Kiwi. And then the date format. So then I'll just go ahead and plop this in here. So here, this is Goose running this recipe. And if I look here, and it has nothing running in it, I'll start to see things pop up in my traces. I'll start to see things pop up in my metrics like MCP duration and capabilities negotiation and stuff. And then I'll start to see logs popping up because I'm using intentionally a slow model here. So it takes a while for it to run. So first it's going through like MCP initialization, listing all the tools, and then running the chat itself. And all of these things are open telemetry. And one of the things that interesting is that these logs here actually emitted directly from Envoy. Um, so in a real deployment, these can be mixed in with anything else that you have, and like for example, your customer group name or whatever dynamic stuff you have. The traces won't look good because when you don't have an application instrumented, like it doesn't have its own OpenTelemetry thing in, there's no way for it to know like what was the agent like original task. So you just see like kind of like it's almost like logs. But each of them, if you were to look through their attributes, you'd be able to see the session ID. And so if you had anything that can group on session ID, you can find everything related to it. And the traces will look better if Goose was actually turned on in OpenTelemetry mode. But I just wanted to show that there is a way to get this information, like how much tokens were used by this. So it looks like the buckets of like between 1 and 4,000 tokens. Like, so there are two requests. One had under 4,000, but less than 16,000 tokens, and one had, more than 1,000 and less than 4,000. The aggregation is like normal in metrics. So like you usually want to have like what kind of range stuff is in. As far as individual points, you could see data points like how much was the request duration for each of the requests out for MCP versus LLMs. It's just normal stuff, but it's kind of nice that you get that without actually affecting the app in any way. And that was the main point there. So yeah, it was blabbering more than usual, so I did go over 40 minutes, but luckily it's an hour anyway. What's new? First off, like in the world of Kubernetes, there's this thing called CRD, custom resource definitions. And you can't really use them in an enterprise safely until they're graduated past alpha. So depending on the project, sometimes people are more, they graduate them more quickly than others. But the most fundamental substrates required for Envoy AI Gateway to work are at least V beta now, as of the release that just came out. And that's helpful because now you know that you have a fairly strong chance that the way that gateways and services and backends, like what backend would be like your own connection to Bedrock or whatever, and how MCP routes are fairly stable. So you don't necessarily need to worry about those shifting too much from release to release. It's not out of beta, but if you think about like how Kubernetes world works in general, there's things that have been like beta for like forever. There's some simple things that are helpful. I would say like some more cross-provider translations are not like as hard hitting, but they are hard hitting if you need them. So for example, reasoning effort, if you ever use some a research or a coding agent, you'll see that they have like thinking mode. Is it like high thinking or max thinking or whatever? And if you don't have a portable way to represent that, then you can actually end up spending more per request than you want to. So if you have a portable interface, then you'd want to have like a portable way to do some of these toggles. Obviously, body redaction would have come up, and that came up. We already had ways of doing body redaction inside of the AI Gateway several months ago, but now they're redacting it before it even gets to the logging subsystem, which is interesting. So the traces already had a way to redact on the way out, but this is kind of like shifting that forward, so it's easier for people to control. And then also prompt caching is pretty important for folks who have templatized their prompts in their applications themselves. So like if you have an app that literally has the same prompt uh, or some recipe like template of some kind where it's likely for you to have the same request, like I keep asking for the flight for tomorrow, then you can use some of the backend specific prompt caching in a portable way, which is pretty cool. There's also some pretty interesting things I should mention about fitting a gateway to your site. AI Gateway is a Kubernetes-based gateway system. It fits in with Envoy. And in real life, you have different ways that you can extend it further. So for example, Bloomberg have different filters that they're using for adding more data into their traces. I think they have some other things about like watching the rate limiter in a particularly different way. And Envoy has different ways to fit your site. So they have external proc, which I mentioned. They have a new thing called a dynamic module, which is something that actually runs inside of Envoy's process itself at a pretty high performance. And there's a link there for built on Envoy if you're interested in this sort of like site fitting problem. It's a open source project that my company maintains for extensions to Envoy, which is helpful when it doesn't exactly do everything and you need some last mile stuff. As far as the project itself, there's going to be more of what you'd expect out of a gateway. Quota aware stuff. So like I said before, now we're working on it with more complicated quota policies. And so there's more APIs and things around that. And MCP auth, like I hinted several times, is a very complex space, and there's more work going on in there. So yeah, a recap. Effectively, when you started out with AI gateways, they were pretty much just LLM gateways because that's all we had. And then that went for a long while because tools were also local and they would never hit a gateway anyway. But now with especially with the rise of MCP in the last year, gateways need to take multiple roles, and they will take more roles from there. And so having a single spot to do that can be relevant to you if you have an enterprise context for the reasons mentioned here. And if you do have that, you get some advantages. The developers have less drift because they're using a singular interface, and you have a single way to approach things like auth and throttling. And I hope this was interesting to you. And I do have, I guess we have 5 minutes for Q&A if anyone wants to hang around for it. So I'll stop my sharing, I guess.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
I just share in the chat the link to the new this new Agentic AI Foundation, which actually was created under the Linux Foundation. So I know that they have opened a call for projects at the moment because the foundation was created under 2 or 3 different open source projects. I know Goose is one of them. Do you know what's the status in terms of gateway and telemetry and all these other open source project application, and what's the process? So what's the idea in terms of the foundation in terms of building their own profile of open source projects that might be the default recommendation from this new foundation in terms of the community use those open source projects? Are you somehow updated what the status of this, or what's the process?
Yeah, so I've been working more like on the periphery of the org than in the inside of it. And for example, Envoy AI Gateway itself has applied to move from CNCF into the AIF, and they have kind of like a call for papers sort of thing where there's like, okay, we're accepting new projects, and there's a process for that. I haven't kind of like been stalking progress of which ones are doing that, but it's clearly the case that the portfolio is interested in more relevant projects in the community growth, because it is like it's structurally made, I would say, for 1,000 scale projects. Like they didn't make the AIF to just fold a few projects. So I would imagine that even though it's not going to likely be 1,000 next year, it would probably quickly happen, at least in the several dozen. But I don't have any personal insight into like the dynamics of their ingest pipeline. But
Okay.
I would imagine that I know of like several similar projects who are looking to try to take advantage of the marketing muscle and resources and credibility of the Linux org. There's a lot of reasons why people would want to start that process, and I would say that you would expect some things to be similar to CNCF, but not all of them, because it is intentionally different using their own infrastructure. They don't have all of this. It's not going to be like how I might have accidentally said like CNCF Part 2. It will be a different flavor. And they do have new folks in there. So like the leadership were not like hoisted from CNCF. So the CTO is Manik Sertani. He was actually from Block on Goose team. The general manager, I believe, is also from Goose, Angie Jones. They are not like, well, Manik has been around the block with CNCF, and it's never been like an internal. So I think there's going to be some fresh ideas and fresh approaches in AIF. So I would definitely track it.
Yeah, definitely a place to follow in the next few months or years. So cool. Do we have any question or comments from the audience? Otherwise, so yeah, I will thanks everyone for joining us today. So if you have any comments, again, so I would be open to any suggestion in terms of format. So I was thinking maybe having like a one long session, 1 5-minute session. So if anyone is interested in the future to give a presentation in any of those formats, so feel free to let me know. Any other suggestion, also let me know. So the next session is going to be in 2 weeks. So the speaker and everything else is already confirmed. So I will be sharing the information in the next couple of days. So yeah, that's all. So thank you, Edgan. Thank you very much. Yeah, always a pleasure. And thank you everyone for joining us, and have a good rest of your day and good weekend. Thank you.
Yeah,
See ya.
likewise. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.